Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, July 21st, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. Congress is in session this week as the House wraps up its work before their August recess. On their agenda, legislation to increase financial oversight of the Veterans Affairs Department and votes on bills to increase penalties on people who re-enter the U.S. after being deported and to reform the Clean Water Act's project permitting process. The Senate still has another work week before leaving on their annual break. On their agenda, confirmation votes for several executive nominations. Of course, hanging over all of this, the ongoing issue of the Jeffrey Epstein files. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he doesn't have any plans to put a bipartisan, non-binding resolution on the floor that calls for the Trump administration to release the Epstein files. Instead, he wants to give the administration time to put out documents on its own, following the president's move to release grand jury information on the case. We'll hear from Senate leaders Thune and Schumer and House Democratic leader Jeffries coming up. And yesterday was the 6-month anniversary of the second Trump administration, and polls say Americans are giving the president mixed reviews. A new Decision Desk HQ poll shows the president's disapproval rating near its highest level since January. A new CBS News poll shows Americans say they want the president to focus on consumer prices instead of raising tariffs. And the Washington Post's polling average shows a clear downturn in the president's approval rating on immigration. We'll take a look at the numbers coming up. Also on the Senate's agenda this week, most of the military construction and VA spending for next year. But those executive nominations were on the mind of Senator Thune. Here's what he had to say during Leader Time remarks.
Mr. President, yesterday marked 6 months since President Trump took office. And today is the 200th day of the Republican majority here in the United States Senate. And in that time, the Trump administration and Senate Republicans have been hard at work executing the mandate we received from the American people last November. We already have a number of accomplishments on the list. We got started by sending the Laken-Riley Act to President Trump's desk during the first week in office to keep criminal illegal immigrants off our streets. President Trump signed the HALT Fentanyl Act last Wednesday, which permanently classifies fentanyl analogs as the deadly drugs that they are. On Friday, he signed the Genius Act, a landmark bill to bring digital assets into the mainstream and secure U.S. leadership in financial innovation. And the first rescissions package in 3 decades is headed to the president for his signature. We passed measures to end 16 burdensome Biden-era regulations. We passed the Take It Down Act to combat non-consensual explicit images being shared online. And of course, 2 weeks ago, Mr. President, on the 4th of July, the President signed into law the big, beautiful bill to deliver permanent tax relief for the American people to make our country safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And Mr. President, we have additional bills coming down the pike. The Armed Services Committee under Chairman Wicker recently reported the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026. And the Appropriations Committee under Chair Collins has reported out 4 bipartisan bills, which we will begin considering this week. I said last year that I was committed to bringing appropriations bills to the floor through regular order, and we are in the process of doing exactly that. Of course, any regular order consideration of appropriation bills is going to require cooperation from Democrats, and this week we'll get a glimpse of where Democrats are on this issue. It was deeply disappointing to hear the Democrat leader threaten to shut down the government if Republicans dared to pass legislation to trim just 1/10 of 1% of the federal budget. But I'm hopeful that that is not the position of the Democrat Party. Time will tell. Mr. President, the Senate has also important work to do to confirm the President's nominees. We started out this year by confirming 21 of the President's cabinet nominees at the fastest pace in more than 2 decades. And we've kept up our focus on getting President Trump's team into place. We've now confirmed 96 civilian nominees, far outpacing where the Senate was at this point in the first Trump administration. And the only reason, frankly, Mr. President, that we're not moving faster is because of Democrats' historic, that is right, historic level of obstruction. Democrats have been forcing cloture votes for every civilian nominee, something that is without precedent. President Trump is the first president on record not to have a single civilian nominee go by unanimous consent or voice voice vote at this point in his presidency. The first president on record. Think about that, Mr. President. And Democrats are using this strategy even on non-controversial nominees. Almost a quarter of the nominees whose confirmation process Democrats have dragged out actually got more than 60 votes here on the Senate floor. Mr. President, the American people gave President Trump a mandate, and he deserves to have his team in place to execute that mandate for the American people. Democrats can continue to drag this process out, but Republicans are going to get these nominees confirmed. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Senator Thune's comments come as the president said on social media yesterday that he wants the Republican leader to cancel the Senate's August recess to confirm his, quote, incredible nominees. One of those nominees was on the mind of Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
Last week, Senate Republicans on the Judiciary Committee reported out one of Donald Trump's worst judicial nominees yet, Emil Bove, and that's saying a lot because there are so many bad ones. Judiciary Republicans were so afraid to talk about Mr. Bove's nomination that, in fact, the Republican chair cut off debate time and refused to let all Democrats speak. And rather than being part of this farce, Judiciary Democrats, led by my friend, the ranking member, Senator Durbin, rightly walked out of the hearing. I commend my Democratic colleagues for standing up for the integrity of our courts and refusing to participate in a compromised committee process for a deeply compromised nominee. It's obvious why the Republicans were so eager to cut off debate. They know the arguments against Mr. Bove are telling and so unworthy of anyone nominated to a court of appeals or any judicial position in this government. Mr. Bove is the perfect example of the type of person Donald Trump wants on the bench. Political, aggressive, unprofessional, abusive, and ready and willing to put the Trump agenda over the rule of law. We all know what Donald Trump wants from judges: complete obeisance to whatever he wants, regardless of rule of law, regardless of precedent, regardless of the Constitution. And Mr. Bove has a long history of defending Donald Trump when he was his personal attorney. He defended the president when the president was accused of inciting the January 6th insurrection, mishandling classified documents, falsifying business records, and more. Well, what should that do when someone defends a president who's accused of very serious crimes? It should disqualify them for the bench, but the opposite occurs in the Trump administration. His defense of Trump's indefensible actions earned him a top spot at the DOJ, where he used his power to fire prosecutors who were working on criminal cases for the January 6th insurrectionists. That's right. Mr. Bove helped the rioters who assaulted law enforcement officers on January 6th get off without any charges. What is happening to this country? What is happening? And if that's not enough to disqualify him, one whistleblower testified that Mr. Bove repeatedly told DOJ lawyers to ignore court orders and even deliberately mislead judges. Mr. Bove encouraged officials not to tell judges the truth, the same sort of judges he is now nominated to serve alongside. How can someone who has such disregard for our judges and our courts be trusted on the bench? Mr. Bove's nomination previews the dark, ominous plan that Donald Trump and Republicans have for the federal judiciary. They want to fill our courts with partisan operatives who will protect and serve Donald Trump, not protect the rule of law. Experience doesn't matter. Judicial independence doesn't matter. Understanding the law and applying it without fear or favor, it doesn't matter at all. In fact, there's fear of Donald Trump among so many of the Republican nominees for judge and of so many of our Republican senators. For Donald Trump, the only thing that matters when it comes to judges is unyielding fealty to himself. We have never seen, never, such a disastrous mandate for our federal courts in all of American history. And if the Republicans proceed, the damage to our judiciary will be irreversible. Mr. Bove's nomination is an insult to every single qualified independent judge who has ever sat on the federal courts. He should never have been nominated, he should never have been reported out of committee, and he should never, never be confirmed by the Senate to such an important job.
Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer. Now to the ongoing issue of the Jeffrey Epstein files. The Hill's congressional reporter Michael Schnell writes, the controversy surrounding the Trump administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files is poised to dominate the conversation on Capitol Hill this week as Congress sprints to its August recess. The issue, the Hill writes, is whether the documents related to Epstein should be released and how the Justice Department has dealt with the current uproar. Hill goes on to write, the situation has been a difficult one for congressional Republicans who are weighing listening to the MAGA base and calling for the release of the documents against President Trump, who has urged his party to drop the matter. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked about this afternoon on Capitol Hill.
House Democrats spent last week trying to force votes to release records related to Jeffrey Epstein, and you have said that you support that movement. Why are Democrats just looking at this and pushing for this right now and not really during the Biden administration?
I support transparency in terms of the American people. The far right, Donald Trump, right-wing conspiracy theorists and others are the ones who have put this Jeffrey Epstein thing in the public domain. Let's be clear about that. No one looking at the facts disputes that. This isn't anything that any of us as House Democrats have been focused on ever in terms of trying to fan the flames of what may or may not happen. But once it has broken into the public domain, and there's a clear desire on behalf of the American people to get more information, then the right thing to do is to present the facts and the evidence to the American people so that they can make an informed decision about what may or may not have happened and who may or may not be implicated in the Jeffrey Epstein matter. Let's be clear. Let's be clear about the situation here. Jeffrey Epstein was a friend of Donald Trump. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested during the Trump administration. Jeffrey Epstein was detained during the Trump administration. Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide during the Trump administration. Trump administration officials have said prior to arriving in Washington in positions of prominence, including at the FBI and the Department of Justice, that they were going to release the Epstein files. Trump administration officials are now in a position to release the Epstein files. Does any of that, in your view, have anything to do with President Joe Biden? Why do we think President Joe Biden or President Barack Obama's names are being invoked? Because Donald Trump is running scared. And the Trump administration is running scared. What are they hiding from the American people? Release the files so that the American people can make a decision on their own. This has nothing to do with a Democratic-led conspiracy theory. And the facts and the chronology make that clear.
House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries on Capitol Hill this afternoon. To the White House now, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. She talked to reporters today. She began her comments with marking the president's anniversary of the 6 months of his second term.
Yesterday, as you all know, we celebrated 6 months of the Trump administration. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you day in and day out here at the White House. 6 months, the most transparent administration in history, if I may add. And I know the president just wanted me to highlight his accomplishments over the past 6 months. As you all remember, because you all covered it on the campaign trail, the president really promised the American people many things. But at the top of that list was to defeat the Biden inflation crisis and to secure our border and our homeland. And I think you've all seen in 6 months' time, the president has delivered on those two core campaign promises. Inflation is now running at a 2.1% annual rate. You look at our southern border, look at the numbers. Just last month, 0 illegal aliens were released into our country. And then look at what the president has done on the world stage. He has ended wars like India and Pakistan. He continues to work aggressively to end the war in Russia and Ukraine. He completely obliterated Iran's nuclear sites. He has continued to hopefully negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza to end that conflict and release all of the hostages. We've seen many of the hostages released as a result of this president's efforts. And this president is working around the clock every day to deliver on the promises he made. You also look at some of the cultural issues, to abolish DEI from our federal government and our military, to effectively end men and women's sports, which is a huge common sense policy that the American people support. And then if you look at the president's strong executive orders that have effectively ended the chemical castration of young children in our country. Just today, Washington, D.C. Children's Hospital in this city has announced they are no longer going to be prescribing puberty blockers to minors. This is a huge win for America and our children. There's certainly more work to do, and the president is doing it right now, and he will continue for the next 3.5 years. But certainly we've accomplished so much in just 6 months, and I'm happy to take some questions.
And one of those questions came from NBC News' Kelly O'Donnell.
So at 6 months, the president is also experiencing some pushback from members of his own MAGA base, especially on the matter of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Is the president satisfied that his own supporters are not heeding his call to let it go and to move on?
I know the president would reject that, Kelly. In fact, he cited over the weekend some polls showing that his approval rating with the Republican Party is actually at an all-time high. He's polling 90 to 95% amongst Republicans right now. That's higher than any Republican president or any leader of this party ever. The president is the creator and the leader of the Make America Great Again movement. It's his baby that he made, and he knows what his supporters want. It's transparency, and he has given them that on all accounts when it comes to everything this administration has done, especially when it just comes to the president himself, taking questions from all of you and the press corps on a near daily basis, multiple times a week. No question is off limits here at this White House, not just for the president, but myself as well. Kelly.
Have you called on Kash Patel to do more?
Again, as I just answered, the president has told the Attorney General and the FBI Director to release any credible evidence that they find, and he also signaled to them over the weekend to move forward with unsealing the grand jury documents that were under seal by various judges across the country, and I believe the Attorney General has taken the proper legal action to do that.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. And just when could the White House release anything from the Epstein files? Here's Politico White House reporter Iris Sentner.
This is not a satisfying answer, but the answer is we don't know. We don't know what is in those sealed files. We know that basically the Trump administration has put it in the hands of a federal judge, likely in New York, to choose whether or not to release them. That process could take months. And we also know that once they are released, the DOJ is prepared to black out a lot of it if necessary. And so it's unlikely that even if the files are released, they'll be satisfying to the people who want to see them. However, this is a move by the Trump administration to basically put it in the hands of a judge.
And President Trump has essentially said that same thing, that it may not satisfy people even once it's released. How is the rest of the Trump administration responding to the backlash?
I mean, if you ask the White House anything about the Epstein files, their stock answer is basically, why do you care about this? Why is the media covering this more than any of the president's other, actions, more than all of what they're framing as the president's wins, right? And so they basically say, nobody cares about this other than the media and the people in Washington. Now, that's not necessarily true. Polling shows that a majority of Americans do want the Epstein files to be released. But if you ask the White House, they say no one cares. This is not a story.
Politico White House reporter Iris Sentner on this morning's Washington Journal. Also from Politico, Democrats are planning to force another vote on releasing Jeffrey Epstein-related documents during a Rules Committee meeting this afternoon. Rules Committee Ranking Member Jim McGovern telling Politico, quote, "We're going to give them one last chance to do the right thing before their August break." Politico also reporting that Rules Committee Democrats are planning to offer Kentucky Republican Thomas Massey's bipartisan Epstein bill as an amendment at this afternoon's meeting, but also According to Politico, House Speaker Mike Johnson has said he has no plans for any Epstein-related vote on the House floor this week, saying, quote, "My belief is we need the administration to have the space to do what it is doing, and if further congressional action is necessary or appropriate, then we'll look at that. But I don't think we're at the point right now because we agree with the president." That from House Speaker Mike Johnson. You can always see the House live on C-SPAN, the Senate live on C-SPAN 2, and our full congressional coverage on the C-SPAN Now app and at cspan.org. From CNBC.com, President Trump is denying a Wall Street Journal report that suggested Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talked him out of firing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. According to the Journal report, Secretary Bessent reportedly told the president that removing Jerome Powell before his term is up next spring could spur a negative reaction with financial markets and push the Fed into uncharted legal and political territory. Secretary Bessent talked about it on CNBC this morning.
Well, you know, Joe, I think the problem with stories like this is I'm not sure who the leaker was, but the problem with leakers is they only have partial information. And I think the other problem, too, is that newspapers like the Wall Street Journal are not used to a high-functioning executive president. They are used to, perhaps President Biden, perhaps President Obama, who was not as economically sophisticated as President Trump. President Trump solicits a whole range of opinions and then makes a decision. So he takes a lot of inputs, and at the end of the day, it's his decision, just as it was his decision on Iran. And look at the tremendous success there. Look at the tremendous success at the border. And that is what a great executive looks like.
Would you just offer up what your opinion would be on firing Jay Powell if the president were to do that? Do you think that would be a good idea, or would you dissuade him from that?
Look, Joe, I think that what we need to do is examine the entire Federal Reserve institution and whether they have been successful. I'm speaking, actually, I'm going to be in the building this evening. There is a regulatory conference that begins tomorrow. I'm the keynote speaker tonight talking about regulation. The Fed as well deals with monetary policy, regulations, financial stability. And again, I think that we should think, has the organization succeeded in its mission? If this were the FAA and we were having this many mistakes, we would go back and look at why has this happened? I mean, look at as you said at the top of this broadcast, there was fear mongering over tariffs, and thus far we have seen very little, if any, inflation. We've had great inflation numbers. So, I think this idea of them not being able to break out of a certain mindset, all these PhDs over there, I don't know what they do. This is like universal basic income for, academic economists.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on CNBC earlier today. On a social media post yesterday, the president said about the Wall Street Journal story, quote, "Nobody had to explain that to me. I know better than anybody what's good for the market and what's good for the USA." You're listening to Washington Today.
Dave Barry's memoir is called Class Clown. It is at least his 46th book. On the front of his book, he makes an important declaration, quote, "How I went 77 years without growing up," unquote. For 30 years, Dave Barry wrote a weekly humor column published in newspapers, mostly on the weekends. He retired that column in 2005, but has kept writing. On the back flap of his memoir, the bio says he has more bestsellers than you can count on two hands. Barry won the 1988 Pulitzer Prize for commentary. He lives in Miami.
Author Dave Barry with his book Class Clown, How I Went 77 Years Without Growing Up, on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. We heard Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's comments about the 6-month anniversary of the second Trump administration. Well, the president himself said on social media that since his inauguration in January, the U.S. is, quote, the hottest and most respected country anywhere in the world, and that the past 6 months are, quote, being hailed as one of the most consequential periods of any president. But many Americans don't agree with the president. A new Decision Desk HQ poll found a disapproval rating of 53%, along with a 45% approval rating of the job the president has done so far. An Economist YouGov poll also found the president's disapproval rating at its highest level since the start of his second term. And we mentioned the Washington Post polling average. That shows a clear downturn in the president's approval rating on immigration, one of his signature campaign issues. In May, the polling average showed Americans evenly divided on how the president has handled the issue. The average so far in July, 42% approval with a 54% disapproval. Now, that change was also reflected in a new CBS News poll. Here's CBS News survey director Anthony Salvanto talking about it yesterday on Face the Nation.
Let me start with immigration, because you're right, that is a big reason he won. Deportation in particular. The deportation program started with majority approval, and since then it's declined gradually and then a little more over the last month. But the reason for why it has is pretty compelling, and that is majority now says they think the administration is trying to deport more people than they'd expected it to. And then it's the who. Majority no longer thinks that the administration is just trying to prioritize dangerous criminals, that has expanded. And when they think those things, they're less approving of it overall. It's another component of this, too, which is that you get a majority who doesn't approve of the way in which the administration is using the detention centers as well. So all of that is in the mix. The other part of this, though, is that Donald Trump's handling of immigration more broadly is also down. And that's happening at the same time that Americans say, because they are, that border crossings have gone down. So within that gauge on immigration, you see how much the deportation program is really driving things.
CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto yesterday on Face the Nation. Also from CBS News, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says she's met with the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol protection officer who was shot and wounded while off-duty late Saturday night in New York City. That shooting happened in Riverside Park near the historic Little Red Lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge in Manhattan. Police said the 42-year-old officer was sitting on the rocks with friends when two suspects pulled up on a moped and tried to rob them. Here's Secretary Noem with more.
Our officer was off duty on Saturday evening when him and his friend were attacked. They were attacked by two individuals that were set on robbing them, and thankfully he had his service weapon with him and was able to defend himself and his friend and injured one of those individuals that was trying to do them harm. His quick action speaks to his tenacity and his excellence in training and skill, and because of that, one of the perpetrators was wounded in this interaction and was incarcerated when he came in to get medical treatment. One of the suspected attackers, the one that was injured, his name is Miguel Francisco Mora Nunez, a Dominican national that was entering into this country illegally back in 2023. He was then released back into this country by the Biden administration. Miguel Francisco Mora Nunez is and has a rap sheet that is a mile long. He was arrested. He was charged with grand larceny and also assault. The state of Massachusetts has an active warrant out for him for armed robbery with a firearm. He also has many other charges against him, such as kidnapping and witness intimidation. There's absolutely zero reason that someone who is scum of the earth like this should be running loose on the streets of New York City. He was arrested 4 different times in New York City, and because of the mayor's policies and sanctuary city policies, was released back to do harm to people and to individuals living in this city. Make no mistake, this officer is in the hospital today fighting for his life. life because of the policies of the mayor of the city and the city council and the people that were in charge of keeping the public safe. They refused to do so, and now we have the situation on our hand where someone who has dedicated their lives to protecting the public is now fighting for his own. I'm calling on every single mayor and sanctuary city and sanctuary governor to change their policies and to change their tactics right now. Their job is to take an oath to protect the public, to protect families that are out there every single day trying to provide for each other and to try to live the American dream, and they want to do so safely in their own communities.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. New York City Mayor Eric Adams responded to Secretary Noem's comments, telling CBS News New York, quote, "We have to be clear. There's a balance between humane treatment and very clear actions. And we've shown that. I have not let any areas to be gray on where I stand on those who are here doing the right thing and pursuing the American dream and those who are here turning that dream into a nightmare. That clarity has not been lost on me. I don't think anyone has been more direct on what we're going to do. We're going to allow people to use the services their tax dollars pay for, but we're going to go after those who commit violent acts in our city." That from New York City Mayor Eric Adams speaking to CBS News. From the Associated Press, the Food and Drug Administration has named a longtime pharmaceutical executive, Dr. George Tidmarsh, to lead the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. That department regulates drug safety and effectiveness. George Tidmarsh founded and led several drug companies, including Horizon Pharmaceuticals, which makes an arthritis drug. He's also served as an adjunct professor at Stanford University. And it marks the latest change at the agency. Back in May, FDA Administrator Dr. Marty Makary named Dr. Vinay Prasad, who was a prominent critic of the FDA's COVID response, to run the agency's Vaccine Center and to be Chief Medical Officer. He replaced the FDA's longtime vaccine chief, Dr. Peter Marks, who was forced out in March. Dr. Makary talked about the agency's change on COVID vaccines this morning on Washington Journal.
The entire subject of COVID, I think, has become an issue where some people look to the government for every single health recommendation as to whether or not to get a booster or not get a booster. And what we're doing is we're upholding a pledge that is, we're not going to take away vaccines, but we're going to get away from the idea that the government is your doctor. The health emergency is over with COVID, and we are letting companies know that in our new framework, that if they want to get vaccines, a new vaccine that creates a new protein to vaccinate against COVID, we want to see a clinical trial first if it's going to be a vaccine for young, healthy subjects. And for high-risk individuals, we'll continue to make those available as long as the companies pledge to study the vaccine after it's approved so we can get data to know whether or not to keep going down that path.
The AP also reporting the FDA's Drug Center is the agency's largest unit, with nearly 6,000 staffers who review the safety and effectiveness of new drugs and monitor the use and marketing of older drugs. You can see all of Dr. Makary's segment from this morning at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that were shaping Washington every day, just go to cspan.org/connect. You can get our word for word newsletter there. Again, cspan.org/connect to subscribe to that. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll look at congressional reaction to the Epstein files controversy and potential impact on the legislative agenda with the Hill's congressional reporter Michael Schnell. Then Illinois Democratic Congressman Sean Casten discusses Democrats' strategy on the upcoming government funding deadline and their push for the release of the Epstein files. And journalist Selena Zito talks about her new book, detailing her experience covering the near assassination of President Donald Trump. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.